The man who once used his sharp tongue to attack Mahayana Buddhism later became one of the greatest patriarchs of the very teachings he had criticized. This is not a mythological tale, but the true journey of transformation of a great master who changed the face of Indian Buddhism forever. The question is, what made an outstanding scholar, a genius in debate, who absolutely believed in the Hinayana teachings, completely reverse his viewpoint? And more importantly, what lessons can we draw from this extraordinary life to apply to our own practice journey? Before stepping into that miraculous journey, please comment the word Buddha so your mind can merge with the compassionate light of this wonderful Buddhist story. Around the 4th century CE, in the city of Purusapura, in the kingdom of Gandhara in northern India, a child was born into a prestigious Brahmin family. The city of Purusapura, known today as Peshawar, the capital of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province in Pakistan, was a thriving cultural center at the crossroads of Indian and Greek civilizations. The child was named Vasubandhu, which in Sanskrit means kinsman of heaven, translated into Chinese as Shikin, world kin, or Tianqin, heaven kin. His father was named Kausika, a learned Brahmin priest who was well versed in the Vedic scriptures and served as a spiritual advisor to the court of Gandhara. His mother was named Virinchi according to some records, or Prasanashila according to Tibetan historians. What's special is that Vasubandhu was not an only child. He had an older half-brother named Asanga, whom we know by his Chinese name Wuzuo, non-attachment. Asanga's father was a warrior from the Kshatriya lineage, while Vasubandhu's father was a Brahmin. These two half-brothers would become the two pillars of Mahayana Buddhism, together founding the Yogacara school, one of the most profound philosophical systems in the history of human thought. He also had a younger brother named Virinsivatsa, who later became a bhikkhu following Hinayana Buddhism. Vasubandhu was born exactly 1 year after his elder brother Asanga ordained as a Buddhist monk, according to Tibetan historian Taranatha. From his youth, Vasubandhu displayed signs of natural genius. His memory was extraordinary. Once he heard something, he could remember it forever. His ability for logical analysis was sharp as a razor, able to penetrate to the essence of any philosophical problem. And above all, he possessed a soul that ceaselessly sought truth, refusing to accept any doctrine that had not been tested by reason. Born into a Brahmin family, Vasubandhu was taught the Vedic scriptures, Nyaya and Vaisheshika philosophy by his father from childhood. But the child's soul found no comfort in those teachings. Perhaps influenced by his brother Asanga, or due to karmic connection from past lives, Vasubandhu decided to ordain as a Buddhist monk at a very young age. But unlike his brother who followed Mahayana, Vasubandhu chose the path of Hinayana, specifically the Sarvastivada school, also known as the All Exists school, the journey to seek truth in Kashmir. The Sarvastivada school at that time was one of the most influential Buddhist schools in northern India. The name Sarvastivada means all exists, reflecting the core philosophical view of this school. Phenomena exist in all three times: past, present, and future. This was a profound and complex philosophical view, requiring extraordinary intelligence to grasp the entire system. Vasubandhu studied the Sarvastivada school under teachers Buddhamitra and Manoratha, two learned masters. But despite learning much, Vasubandhu's heart still harbored many doubts about certain points in the Abhidharma teachings of this school. Abhidharma is the advanced analytical system of reality from the Buddhist perspective, a discipline requiring sharp intelligence and excellent logical analysis ability. To resolve these doubts, Vasubandhu decided to do something bold. he would travel to Kashmir, the orthodox center of the Vaibhashika school, the most orthodox branch of Sarvastivada. Kashmir at that time was the most important Buddhist scholastic center, gathering the most learned masters of Abhidharma. But there was a problem. The Kashmiri scholars had very strict rules that their teachings could only be transmitted internally, not spread outside. Vasubandhu had to disguise himself to join the monastic community in Kashmir. There, he studied under Master Skandila and other teachers for 4 years, approximately from 342 to 346 CE according to some records. With his superior intelligence, Vasubandhu quickly mastered the entire Vaibhashika system. But true to his critical thinking nature, he didn't just learn but also questioned, debated, and pointed out contradictions in the teachings. This made the masters in Kashmir feel frustrated. One day, Master Skandila entered meditation and discovered that Vasubandhu was not from Kashmir, not an orthodox member of their school. He immediately advised Vasubandhu to leave before being discovered, as revealing the school's secrets could lead to serious consequences. Vasubandhu heeded the advice and returned to Gandhara. But in his mind, he was already nurturing a grand plan, the treatise that shook the Buddhist world. Returning home, Vasubandhu began the project of his lifetime. He lived in a private monastery in the center of Purusapura, supporting himself by teaching the Dharma to the public. After each lecture, he would distill what he had said into concise verses. These were not ordinary verses. Each verse was a gem of thought, containing the most profound analyses of the nature of reality. After many years, Vasubandhu completed 600 verses, forming the Abhidharmakosa Karika, or Treasury of Abhidharma. But he didn't stop there. He also wrote his own auto-commentary on these verses, creating the Abhidharmakosa Bhashya. In total, this treatise equaled approximately 8,000 verses, including the commentary. When news of this treatise reached Kashmir, the masters there were initially overjoyed. They thought this was an excellent synthesis of their Vaibhashika teachings. But the joy didn't last long. When they read the commentary carefully, they discovered that Vasubandhu had criticized many points in Vaibhashika doctrine from the Sautrantika perspective, another Hinayana school. The Sautrantika school advocated that one should only trust what is taught directly in the original scriptures, not rely too much on later commentaries and interpretations. Vasubandhu used this view to point out contradictions and illogicalities in Vaibhashika teachings. The Kashmiri scholars were extremely angry, feeling betrayed. One of the most famous scholars of the Vaibhashika school, named Sangabhadra, wrote 2 treatises to refute Vasubandhu's views. He even traveled to Ayodhya, where Vasubandhu was living under the patronage of King Baladitya, to challenge him to a public debate. But Vasubandhu refused to participate in this public debate, not because he feared losing, but because he had realized that debate was not the path to enlightenment. At this point, Vasubandhu was famous throughout India with the title Master of Treatises, a master of scholastic discourse. However, despite the Abhidharmakosa becoming a classic text, despite his fame echoing everywhere, something in Vasubandhu's heart remained unfulfilled. The arrogance of a genius. During these years, Vasubandhu was not only famous for his scholarship, but also for his arrogant attitude toward Mahayana. He believed that Mahayana scriptures were not the authentic teachings of the Buddha. He attacked those practicing Mahayana as following false teachings. Whenever he heard about Mahayana treatises, he showed contempt, especially regarding his brother Asanga's works on Yogacara philosophy. He considered them mere fantasy, without logical foundation. There's a famous story that whenever Asanga sent messengers to bring his Mahayana texts to Vasubandhu, He would refuse to even look at them. He even said, "These teachings are just the fabrications of later generations, not the Buddha's words. Why waste time reading them?" This arrogant attitude hurt Asanga deeply, but the elder brother didn't give up on his younger sibling. Asanga understood that Vasubandhu's intelligence was extraordinary, and if he could transform his views, he would become a powerful force for spreading Mahayana teachings. But how to change the mind of someone so stubborn and confident in his own views? Asanga knew that direct confrontation would only make Vasubandhu more entrenched in his position, so he waited patiently for the right opportunity. Vasubandhu used this view to point out contradictions and illogicalities in Vaibhashika teachings. The Kashmiri scholars were extremely angry, feeling betrayed. One of the most famous scholars of the Vaibhashika school, named Sangabhadra, wrote 2 treatises to refute Vasubandhu's views. He even traveled to Ayodhya, where Vasubandhu was living under the patronage of King Baladitya, to challenge him to a public debate. But Vasubandhu refused to participate in this public debate, not because he feared losing, but because he had realized that debate was not the path to enlightenment. At this point, Vasubandhu was famous throughout India with the title Master of Treatises, a master of scholastic discourse. However, despite the Abhidharmakosa becoming a classic text, despite his fame echoing everywhere, something in Vasubandhu's heart remained unfulfilled. The awakening. That opportunity came in an unexpected way. One day, Asanga pretended to be seriously ill. He sent a messenger to Vasubandhu, saying he was about to pass away and wanted to see his younger brother one last time. Despite their different views on the Dharma, the brotherly bond remained strong. Vasubandhu immediately rushed to Asanga's monastery. When he arrived, Asanga asked the monks to recite some Mahayana sutras for him to hear. Vasubandhu sat listening, and for the first time in his life, he truly opened his heart to listen to Mahayana teachings without prejudice. What he heard shook him to the core. The Mahayana sutras spoke of boundless compassion, of the aspiration to save all sentient beings, of the profound wisdom that transcends all conceptual distinctions. These were not baseless fantasies, as he had thought. On the contrary, they were teachings of profound depth, completely in harmony with the Buddha's original spirit. Vasubandhu suddenly realized he had been wrong all along. He had been so caught up in logic and debate that he had lost sight of the Buddha's true purpose: to liberate all beings from suffering. Tears streamed down his face. He knelt before Asanga and said, "Brother, I have been blind. I have used my tongue to slander the Mahayana teachings. This tongue should be cut off to atone for my sin." But Asanga smiled gently and replied, "If you used your tongue to slander Mahayana, now use that same tongue to praise and propagate Mahayana. Don't cut it off, but transform it." These words became a turning point in Vasubandhu's life, a master of scholastic discourse. However, despite the Abhidharmakosa becoming a classic text, despite his fame echoing everywhere, something in Vasubandhu's heart remained unfulfilled: the transformation. From that moment, Vasubandhu completely changed. He devoted himself to studying Mahayana teachings with the same passion and intelligence he had once used to criticize them. Under Asanga's guidance, he delved deep into Yogacara philosophy, also known as consciousness-only philosophy. This philosophical system teaches that all phenomena we experience are merely manifestations of consciousness. The external world as we perceive it doesn't exist independently but is constructed by our mind. This was a revolutionary view, completely changing how we understand reality. Vasubandhu not only studied but also began writing commentaries and treatises to explain and develop Yogacara teachings. His first major work after conversion was a commentary on the Dashabhumika Sutra, a scripture about the 10 stages of a bodhisattva's path. Then he wrote commentaries on the Lotus Sutra, the Nirvana Sutra, and many other Mahayana scriptures. But his most important work was the Trimsika Karika, or 30 verses on consciousness only. This text, though only 30 verses long, contains the essence of the entire Yogacara system. Each verse is like a key opening a door to understanding the nature of mind and reality. Vasubandhu also wrote the Vimsatika Karika, or 20 verses on consciousness only, in which he refuted objections to Yogacara philosophy and demonstrated the logical validity of the view that everything is consciousness. These works became fundamental texts of the Yogacara school, studied and revered for over 1,600 years, a master of scholastic discourse. However, despite the Abhidharmakosa becoming a classic text, despite his fame echoing everywhere, something in Vasubandhu's heart remained unfulfilled. Vasubandhu didn't just write books. He also devoted himself to teaching and spreading the Dharma. He traveled throughout India, lecturing, debating, and guiding students. Wherever he went, people flocked to listen to his teachings. His lectures were not dry philosophical discourses, but were full of life, illustrated with vivid examples, easily understood, even by ordinary people. Yet they also contained profound depth that even the most learned scholars had to contemplate. One of Vasubandhu's special qualities was his ability to tailor his teaching to each person's capacity. For beginners, he taught basic practices like taking refuge, keeping precepts, cultivating compassion. For advanced practitioners, he taught deep meditation methods and profound philosophical insights. For scholars, he engaged in sophisticated debates about the nature of reality and consciousness. King Baladitya of Ayodhya was one of Vasubandhu's devoted disciples. The king not only supported the master financially, but also personally practiced according to his guidance. Thanks to this patronage, Vasubandhu could establish many monasteries and hospitals. He used all the wealth he received to serve the community, not keeping anything for personal use. This embodied the Bodhisattva spirit, living not for oneself, but for all beings. Vasubandhu also wrote the Vimsatika Karika, or 20 verses on consciousness only, in which he refuted objections to Yogacara philosophy and demonstrated the logical validity of the view that everything is consciousness. These works became fundamental texts of the Yogacara school, studied and revered for over 1,600 years, a master of scholastic discourse. However, despite the Abhidharmakosa becoming a classic text, despite his fame echoing everywhere, something in Vasubandhu's heart remained unfulfilled. The 8 consciousnesses. One of Vasubandhu's most important contributions to Buddhist philosophy is the detailed teaching about the 8 consciousnesses. According to Yogacara philosophy, we don't have just one consciousness, but 8 layers of consciousness. The first 5 consciousnesses are the sense consciousnesses: eye, ear, nose, tongue, and body consciousness. These consciousnesses arise when our sense organs come into contact with their objects. The 6th consciousness is the mental consciousness, which thinks, reasons, and makes decisions. The 7th consciousness is called manas, or the afflicted mind, which constantly clings to the 8th consciousness as self. This is the root of ego clinging, the source of all suffering. The 8th consciousness is alaya vijnana, or storehouse consciousness, which stores all karmic seeds from past actions. This consciousness is like a vast warehouse containing all our karmic imprints from beginningless time. Every action, word, and thought leaves a seed in the alaya consciousness. These seeds will ripen in the future, creating our experiences. Understanding the 8 consciousnesses helps us see how karma works, why we suffer, and how to transform. When we realize that everything we experience comes from our own consciousness, we can begin to take responsibility for transforming our mind. This is the essence of practice, not changing the external world, but transforming our way of perceiving and responding. A master of scholastic discourse. However, despite the Abhidharmakosa becoming a classic text, despite his fame echoing everywhere, something in Vasubandhu's heart remained unfulfilled. Vasubandhu's final years. Vasubandhu lived to about 80 years old, an impressive age for that era. According to records, he passed away in Ayodhya around 400 CE, but some scholars believe he lived longer, perhaps until 430 CE. Before passing, he entrusted his disciples to continue spreading Mahayana teachings. His direct disciples included many outstanding masters who would later become pillars of Buddhism. One notable disciple was Dignaga, who would become the founder of Buddhist logic. Another was Thiramati, who wrote important commentaries on Vasubandhu's works. Through these disciples and their students, Vasubandhu's teachings spread throughout Asia. In the 7th century, the Chinese monk Xuanzang traveled to India to study Buddhism. He brought back many of Vasubandhu's texts and translated them into Chinese. These translations became the foundation for the Faxiang school in China, corresponding to Yogacara in India. From China, these teachings spread to Korea, Japan, and Vietnam. Today, Vasubandhu's works are still studied in Buddhist universities and monasteries throughout East Asia. This is the essence of practice, not changing the external world, but transforming our way of perceiving and responding. A master of scholastic discourse. However, despite the Abhidharmakosa becoming a classic text, despite his fame echoing everywhere, something in Vasubandhu's heart remained unfulfilled. Lessons from Vasubandhu's life. Vasubandhu's life offers many profound lessons for us today. First lesson: the courage to admit mistakes. It takes tremendous courage to acknowledge that what you've believed for years, what you've vigorously defended, is wrong. Most people, when faced with evidence contradicting their views, tend to deny or find ways to rationalize. But Vasubandhu, despite being a genius recognized throughout India, despite having immense pride in his knowledge, was still able to humble himself and admit error. This is a rare quality, and we should learn from it. In life, we all make mistakes. What matters is not never being wrong, but having the courage to admit mistakes and correct them. Second lesson: intellectual humility. Despite his extraordinary intelligence, Vasubandhu was trapped by his own arrogance. He thought he understood everything, that his view was the only correct one. This arrogance blinded him from seeing greater truths. Only when he let go of his ego and opened his heart to listen could he see the whole picture. In today's age, when information is everywhere, when everyone can voice their opinion, intellectual humility becomes more important than ever. We need to recognize that no matter how much we learn, there's still infinitely more we don't know. Third lesson: familial bonds, teacher-student relationships, and friendships are priceless blessings. Without a sangha, Vasubandhu might have continued down the wrong path. But a sangha didn't give up on his brother. He patiently waited for the right moment to guide him. This is a manifestation of compassion and wisdom, knowing how to help others awaken without forcing, without creating adverse conditions. In life, we also need people like a sangha, people who love us enough to tell us the truth, even if that truth might hurt. And we also need to be such people for those we love. Fourth lesson: negative energy can be transformed into positive. Asanga's advice about using the tongue to praise Mahayana instead of cutting it off is a profound symbol. We don't need to deny or destroy our past. Instead, we can learn to transform, using the very experiences and abilities we have to serve better purposes. Every experience, even painful ones, can become a foundation for growth. Fifth lesson: scholarship must go hand in hand with practice. Vasubandhu was not just a speculative philosopher, he was also a serious practitioner. His theories were not mere speculation, but the result of practice and realization. This reminds us that Buddhist knowledge is not for showing off or debating, but for applying to life, transforming the mind, liberating suffering. Sixth lesson: dedication to all beings is true happiness. Vasubandhu used all his wealth to build monasteries and hospitals. He devoted his entire life to writing, teaching, spreading the Dharma. This is a manifestation of the Bodhisattva spirit, not for personal benefit, but for the common good of all beings. In today's age, when materialism and individual ego are emphasized, Vasubandhu's lesson about altruism has special value. The meaning of Yogacara for modern life. Vasubandhu's Yogacara teachings are not just ancient philosophy, but have profound meaning for modern life. The view that everything we experience is a manifestation of consciousness can help us understand the power of mind. When we realize that the world we perceive depends greatly on how we see it, we can learn to change our perception, to change our experience. The teaching about the 8 consciousnesses helps us understand the deep layers of mind, not just surface consciousness, but also unconscious layers that affect our behavior and thinking. This parallels modern psychology, especially theories about the unconscious by Freud and Jung. The teaching about karmic seeds in the Alaya consciousness helps us understand how every action, word, and thought leaves traces in the mind and affects the future. This is the basis of the law of cause and effect, of practice and transformation. In the digital age, when we live in virtual worlds on social media, Yogacara teachings about the illusory nature of phenomena become more relevant than ever. We realize that most of what we consider reality is just images and concepts created by consciousness. And when we understand this, we can be freer, not bound by false conceptions. Bodhisattva Vasubandhu in various traditions. Bodhisattva Vasubandhu is honored in many different Buddhist traditions. In the Pure Land school, he is considered the second patriarch, who wrote important commentaries on the Infinite Life Sutra and spread the practice of Buddha name recitation. In the Chan school, he is considered the 21st patriarch, continuing the lineage from Bodhidharma. In the Tibetan tradition, he is one of the 6 ornaments, the 6 most revered Indian masters. At Nalanda, the most famous Buddhist university in ancient India, he is listed among the 17 masters of Nalanda. This widespread veneration shows his profound influence on the entire Buddhist tradition. Regardless of sectarian differences, everyone acknowledges Vasubandhu's tremendous contribution to the Dharma, the immortal legacy. Now, over 1,600 years since Bodhisattva Vasubandhu's passing, but his legacy remains as vibrant as ever. His works are still studied, debated, and taught in Buddhist academies throughout Asia. The Abhidharmakosa remains required curriculum for Buddhist students in Tibet, China, Korea, and Japan. His Yogacara works remain the foundation for studies of mind and consciousness in Buddhism. In the 20th and 21st centuries, Western scholars began studying Vasubandhu's thought and recognizing its profundity. Philosophers compare Yogacara with Husserl's phenomenology, Berkeley's idealism, Kant's critical philosophy. Psychologists see parallels between the teaching of 8 consciousnesses and theories of the unconscious. Neuroscientists are beginning to study the relationship between Buddhist teachings on mind and modern discoveries about the brain. All this shows that Vasubandhu's thought has not only historical value but also present and future value. The path from arrogance to humility. Bodhisattva Vasubandhu's life is a journey from arrogance to humility, from dogmatism to openness, from thinking only of oneself to living for all beings. It's the journey of a real person, with real mistakes and real transformations. That's precisely why his story has such powerful resonance for each of us. We don't need to be geniuses to learn from Vasubandhu. The lessons about the courage to admit mistakes, about humility in learning, about love between people, about transforming negative energy into positive, about dedication to all beings. All these lessons can be applied to each of our lives. In today's age, when polarization, hatred, and dogmatism are increasing, Vasubandhu's story reminds us that no one is completely right or completely wrong. Truth is often greater than what we think, and the most important thing is not always being right, but having enough wisdom and courage to change when necessary. Bodhisattva Vasubandhu has shown us that path, a path not easy, but full of meaning and worth taking. Do you dare to change like Bodhisattva Vasubandhu? After reading this story, perhaps you're asking yourself, what false views am I holding on to? Do I have the courage to let go of my arrogant ego and open my heart to learning? Can I transform the negative energies of my past into positive momentum for the present? These are precisely the questions that everyone on the path of practice must answer. Subscribe to follow the Academy of Saints channel to continue the journey of discovering profound lessons from the sages. Each week will bring you true stories, deep analyses, lessons that can be immediately applied to life. Please hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and share this video with those you love, because knowledge has no value if not shared, and the path to enlightenment cannot be walked alone. Let us learn together, grow together, walk together on the path to inner peace. See you in the next video about other sages. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha.